Welcome to the Chemistry of Life Part 2, our introduction to biochemistry, and today we're going to talk about the big molecules in cells. So we already learned about these ideas here, and based on what we learned, if you pause the video for a moment, you should be able to complete the blanks in these sentences. So all matter is made up of atoms. Atoms can join together to form molecules. And examples of molecules are water, chemical formula, H2O, and carbon dioxide, chemical formula, CO2. Now water and carbon dioxide are both really small molecules. Each is made up of only 3 atoms, but the big molecules can be made up of hundreds, thousands, or even millions of atoms. And the big molecules that we're going to talk about fall into 4 groups. We have proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids. And I'll talk about each one in turn. So proteins are large molecules which are made up of long chains of much smaller molecules called amino acids, which are joined together to form a long chain, as we can see in this picture. These are showing lots of amino acids joined up together to make one protein. Now, the important thing to realize is that there are about 20 different kinds of amino acids in cells, but these can join up in many different ways to make hundreds, even thousands of different proteins. It's a little bit like saying there are about 20 letters in an alphabet, and these 20 letters can be joined up to make hundreds or thousands of different words. And proteins perform many important functions in cells. Just as an example, this here is a picture of a cell membrane. So this is the outside of the cell, this is the inside of the cell, and here, we have different kinds of proteins, and the proteins in the cell membrane can allow substances to enter or to leave cells. So if you remember, we spoke about the purpose of a cell membrane. The function is to allow things in or out of cells, and the molecules that do this job are the proteins within the cell membrane. They allow some things to pass through from the outside to the inside, or the inside to the outside. Another very important function of proteins in cells is to make enzymes. Enzymes, what is an enzyme? Well, enzymes in cells are proteins which speed up chemical reactions, and I've given them 2 stars here because the word enzyme is maybe one of the most important words in biochemistry. In this picture here, I've shown the enzyme as this big blue lump here. And this enzyme has the purpose of joining together 2 molecules, which I've shown as this green square and the red circle. And the way the enzymes work is that they form a surface for these to come together. And when they come together, they can be joined. And so the enzyme joins together the 2 molecules to make a bigger molecule. Other enzymes may have different functions, such as breaking down a big molecule into 2 smaller molecules. The point is that the enzyme is not used up or changed in the reaction. It can be used over and over again. And enzymes control all of the chemical reactions in living things. For example, digesting food is something which is controlled by enzymes, or making up the chemicals which are important in cells or in the organism. So as a summary, for proteins in membranes control what goes in and out of cells, and proteins make up enzymes. So these are 2 of the important jobs of proteins in cells. Let's move on to the second group of big molecules, the carbohydrates. This picture here shows 3 different carbohydrates. We have a very simple sugar, which is glucose. This here in this bag is sucrose, which is the normal sugar that people add to tea or coffee. and it is a little bit bigger than glucose, but basically quite similar. And then the desktop is actually mostly made up of another carbohydrate called cellulose. You may remember that cellulose is what plant cell walls are made of. If we think about the structure of carbohydrates, large carbohydrate molecules are made up of many small carbohydrate molecules joined together. So this picture here shows rice. Rice is very rich in a carbohydrate called starch. Now, starch is a very large carbohydrate molecule, but it's made up of many small carbohydrates, many sugar molecules which are joined together. In fact, if you take rice in your mouth and chew it for a long time, you will find that it gets sweeter. That's because enzymes in our mouth digest up the starch to release sugar molecules, and so we taste the rice as becoming sweeter. And carbohydrates are important in energy storage in plant and animal cells. So here we have our class potato, and inside the potato is starch, and that starch is used for energy for the growing sprouts on the potato. These are not getting energy from sunlight, they're getting energy from the starch which is stored inside. And carbohydrates are also important in structure, especially in plant cells. Remember, plant cell walls are made of the carbohydrate called cellulose. Remember the cell wall, the cellulose forms this we heard it described as a woven basket, this tough, rigid structure around the cell of a plant. So to sum up for carbohydrates, functions in storing energy in cells and making the tough walls for plant cells. Let's move on now to discuss lipids. Lipids are a group of chemicals which include fats and oils. And in cells, the most important function of lipids is to form the cell membranes. Remember, all cells have membranes, and having a membrane is really what makes a cell a cell. So here we come back to our picture of a cell membrane, and remember we said these were proteins. Now these parts here and here and the inside are the lipids. Now to understand this picture, you have to understand this as being a big sheet of a cell membrane, not a mouth with teeth, but a big sheet. This picture here shows a bottle of salad dressing. Now, what does that have to do with cells? Well, salad dressing is usually made of oil and something like vinegar, which is watery. So oil and water. And these two do not mix. The oil forms a layer at the top. The watery part forms a layer at the bottom. And this is because the lipids, which are the oils, do not mix with water. But what does this have to do with cells? Well, in this picture here, I've tried to show the molecules which make up the lipids in a cell membrane. So this is a membrane here. This could be the outside of the cell, the inside of a cell. And this is a molecule which makes up the membrane. So this is a lipid molecule. And you can see that these molecules have two parts. They have a head, and they have these tail-like parts here. Now, the important thing is that these tail-like parts do not associate with water. It's a bit like this. They don't mix with water. So they line up so that the heads are pointing at the watery parts of the cell, inside or outside of the cell, and the tails are pointing inside so that they're not in contact with water. And when these molecules all line up like this, thousands, millions of them, then a sheet of membrane is formed. So the membrane is actually made of a double layer of lipids. So that's what's shown in this picture here from the textbook. The head of the lipids here, and the tail is pointing in the way. So lipids, the important function, lipids form cell membranes. And finally we come to our last group of big molecules, the nucleic acids. So there are two kinds of nucleic acids in cells, DNA and RNA. And these are important in storing genetic information and using that information to make proteins. Something we will study in much more detail later is the structure of DNA, but this is a DNA molecule, and it's twisted like this in the famous double helix structure. And DNA is found in all living things. So DNA is found in the nucleus of a eukaryotic cell, and the chromosomes, which can be found in nuclei, are made of DNA twisted round proteins. So as a summary, you could think of these three questions here. I hope you've enjoyed learning about the big molecules of life.